Well, we're gonna devour the word first. So we're in Romans still, and we will be for some time. But it's the simple approach. It's the obviously simple approach to Romans. It's just simply Romans. So Paul writes this incredible treatise. It's detailed. It's sort of a self-proclaiming of what he finally figured out once he came to the Damascus Road appearance with Jesus. What he finally figured out about why it is he got it so wrong about Jesus being the Messiah, how he got it so wrong about trying to live like a Pharisee, doing all the letter of the law perfectly, and why that was insufficient. How do you put those worlds together? How do you take the world of grace and what God has done for us on our behalf that we're not worthy for through the blood of Christ, and you marry that together with all the stuff in the Old Testament about you got to do, which he was doing pretty darn good. So this is how those worlds come together in a detailed understanding. And today we continue on the first part of the message, which is the bad news. Verse 1, 2, 3, around there, he talks so much about the good news. There is really good news. But the good news presumes that there's bad news. And the bad news that we're right smack dab, we're up to chest level in the bad news right now, is the fact that we are all sinners. And we are all without excuse. And a day is coming where God will judge us, all of us. So he's amplifying this a little bit today, and he's changing the audience just slightly. So last week, if you remember, we read this verse right here, which, taken out of context, has been twisted in crazy ways. For it's not the hearers of the law being a statement of right and wrong. It's not the hearers of the law who are righteous before God, like these people right here, which we can tell, that they're hearers of the law because they're carrying Bibles. So very obvious right there. It's not just the hearers. So hearing is part one, but you can't stop right there. It's not just the hearers, but the doers of the law will be justified. That is, they'll come out on the good side after judgment, justified. So then, if you take this out of context like it is, then it seems like the obvious solution to that, doers of the law, well, that just means that we have to try harder, right? And that's the message of the majority of all false religion. If we're going to be judged based on our actions, then go out there and try harder fixing your actions. And that, to be fair, that's an honest conclusion from this. But it's a microscopic conclusion of looking at just this verse. And I've seen so many cases where this verse has been put out there saying, you got to go out there and tomorrow morning you got to try even harder. That's what it's all about, because God's going to judge you based on whether you're a doer of the law, not just a hearer of the law. But we brought up some problems last week about saying that the solution to this problem is just to try harder. And we saw a little bit last week, and we'll see a ton today about why just doing it, just trying, is probably not the answer. It's by far, it is the line of judgment, but how to remedy it? Well, it's not really trying harder, because these people who are carrying these books also have heart problems. They have a serious heart disease that all mankind has, and God is going to judge not just based on your actions, but also on your heart. It's the whole package is what he's talking about, and we'll see more about that today. So these heart problems we looked at last week, maybe those are insurmountable because they deal with things that are impossible for us to deal with in our lives. See, the law in the real sense, the law with my very cosmic alien-looking guy right here, the law that is a statement of right and wrong is something that you hear first, and then it works its way down. It's incorporated into your heart, into the things that you love and you value. There are values that are inbred into you because of what you hear. And then based on these values that you love about the law, it works its way out into the actions of your hands and feet, and you do on the outside. And this is really the model. And when Jesus in the end of Matthew 5 was saying, be ye perfect because, your Father in heaven's perfect. What he was saying in that word perfect was you need to be complete. You need to be finished. And the finished picture of a follower of Christ, a finished picture, is someone who not only hears the law, but has fallen in love with the law, and it's worked its way out into doing in their lives. And yet, in Matthew 5, Jesus was really haranguing them because all they were dealing with was the actions of their hands. They weren't committing adultery. But what about their hearts? Their hearts were wishing for adultery. And if that's the case, then you're not the whole package. You're not finished. You need to be finished. You need to be perfect. It needs to be the whole package. So keep this in mind, because this is where he's coming from. There's things that you hear about right and wrong. There's things that you love about right and wrong. And there's things that you do versus right and wrong. And when he says through this passage, and he'll say it many times, that God will judge you based on your actions, what he's saying is that you do what your heart loves. See, wait a second, that's not always true. Well, no, we can fake it a little bit. I mean, I hate doing this, but I'm going to do it anyway. That whole kind of thing. That's not complete. God's not going to say, well, good for you. You did it even though your heart hated to do it. No, God's going to judge the whole package. So there's a whole package issue, and that complicates the whole remedy that we propose about trying harder. Because you can, to some degree, change the actions of your hands. But it's very hard to change the attitudes of your heart on those things. Remember the rich young ruler that came to Jesus? And he basically asked him, what do I need to do to be right? I've done all the commandments. Actions of the hands. I've done all the commandments. What do I do? And Jesus says, well, you're a rich guy. I'm paraphrasing. You need to go sell everything you have and give it to the poor and then come back and follow me. And he went away sad. Why? Well, because his heart was in love with his riches. And to give that up would be a hard issue. He could actually do that. But say you rewrote the story. Say you went and this guy says, yes, Jesus, I'll do that. And he goes away grumbling, going, and he sells all the stuff. Take it. And he comes back to Jesus and says, okay, I did it. Would Jesus be happy? No, because he's still loving his riches now gone. So there's something about the heart that makes the trying harder thing very complicated. Jesus says it in Matthew 5, and Paul's going to say it over and over in Romans 1, and he's going to make the point really big today. So if you think that the remedy is do it harder, try harder. You got to keep reading Romans, and we're going to get to much more of it today. Even earlier in chapter 1, he says there's something more fundamental about what's broken in us. What's broken in us is that we failed to honor God and to thank him, and everything else fell apart inside of us. So that must be more core to the issue about how we go through this transformation. He says, at the end of last week, we read this verse, and their conflicting thoughts, that's what they understand, and their heart's desires, their conflicting thoughts accuse or even excuse them on that day when, according to my gospel, God judges the secrets of men by Christ Jesus. So he's now said he's going to judge us based on what we do, and he's also going to judge us based on our secrets. So, oh my gosh, we've got a much bigger problem than we thought. If we just radically transform our actions and try harder, he's still going to judge us based on our secrets, the things we love. And don't misunderstand, when he says, hearing and knowledge, that's what you hear, that's what you understand, that's your cognitive brain getting it. But then your heart is where the values get instilled. Your heart is also the base of the things that you love and that you pursue and your aspirations. Everything that you think will bring life comes from your heart. So the heart is really a metaphor for the places of your desires and your goals and your directions and what you think is important. What is your paradigm for life? That's what your heart dictates. And for some people, the paradigm for their life is just the endless pursuit of happiness. That's hedonism. And they say, there's no other point in life except to find as much fun as I can possibly get. I don't care about other people. I'm going to grab as much gusto as I can. I'm just going to push forward, and that's what I'm going to do. And that's the paradigm of their heart. That's what their heart says. That's where you'll find life. Just maximize pleasure. Well, there's a lot of warnings in Scripture. You don't want to do that. And people who do that end up ruined. It's a lie. Just to tell you, if you're thinking about trying that this week, yeah, that's a good idea. Tomorrow, I think I'm going to try that. I'm just going to, don't try that. So anyway, the secrets of men is what we're going to be judged by. So that was last week. And today we're going to look at a bunch of people who have none of this lower stuff working. They not only don't do the law necessarily, but they don't love the law. All they are is just hearers of the law. That's the only thing they got going on there for them. It's just being hearers. They've heard it, and it hasn't moved into their heart, and it hasn't moved into their actions necessarily. And so Paul's going to talk about them, because last week and the week before, we really emphasized the people who were uninformed, that is the Gentiles, who don't have the law written down in, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. They don't have it written down. Those poor saps, they just don't know right from wrong. Well, they're without excuse. We found out why. Now these people who are just hearers, the Jews, they're without excuse as well. So that's where he's going to turn his thinking today, and that's where we pick up today for the new stuff. This is the Jew for him, the Jew that's failing, just hears the law. So we pick up today Romans 2, verse 17. But if you call yourself a Jew, and you rely on the law, and you boast in God, and you know his will, and you approve what is excellent, because you're instructed from the law, if this is you, so that's like, attention, if this is you, is this you? Are you basically, you call yourself a Jew, and there's a lot of pride in the way he's phrased that. Do you call yourself a Jew? Hello, I'm a Jew. Oh, and by the way, you're not. Too bad for you. Okay, that's what he's saying. You call yourself a Jew, and a Jew in the way he's using it is someone who has a son of a covenant with God that started with Abraham, this mutual covenant. If you'll be my people, I'll be your God. Those people who say we'll be your people, those are the Jews, a.k.a. So he says, if you call yourself one of those people of that covenant, if you're proud that that's your ethnic background, if that's where you come from and your father and your grandfather and everyone, if that's who you are, one of these in the line of people who are children of this covenant promised from God, I'll be your God if you'll be my, if that's you, and you're proud of that fact, and you rely on the law, oh yes, I have the law. I rely on this law. Yes, this is, and for a Pharisee, which is like an uber Jew, this relationship with the law is extreme. I mean, it's for Paul before he came to Christ as a Pharisee, that was his Bible, literally. He lived life based on the do's and don'ts inside that word. He had that, which was an advantage he thought he had over those who did not have it. And he's going to hit on that today too. So you call yourself a Jew, you rely on the law, because after all, the law was given to the nation of Israel. You boast in God. Oh, our God beats your God, the end. Well, the Jews had a good reason to boast in God. In fact, there's a good context to boast in God. Do I have a Bible here? I forgot to put this up here. There's a good context to boast in God, because the prophet Jeremiah says in Jeremiah 9, I just thought of this, so sorry I didn't put it on the slide. If you're taking notes, it's Jeremiah 9:24. Jeremiah 9:24. But let him who boasts boast in this, that he understands and knows me. This is God speaking. That he understands and knows me, that I am the Lord who exercises loving kindness and justice and righteousness on earth. For I delight in these things, declares the Lord. So there's a good context to boast in the Lord. But do you really know the Lord? I mean, do you really boast in what he's calling about here in Jeremiah? Do you boast in his loving kindness and boast in the fact that he exercises justice and righteousness for all on earth? Do you delight in those things? Well, Paul's saying right here, you may say that you boast in God in a good way, Jeremiah 9:24, but God's kind of the furthest thing from your mind right now. Really, isn't he? Aren't you really all about, Mr. Pharisee Jew, aren't you really about taking the list of do's and don'ts and trying harder all the time and telling other people they need to try harder all the time? Where's God in that whole thing? Where is he? So you boast in God and you know his will. Wow. You know, God and I, we're like this. I know everything that he needs. Oh, we're tightly connected together. I know his will and everything. I know who he is. You want to know about God? I know his will. Ask me. This is the Jewish kind of pride. Yeah, that's what's sticking out there. So they claim, and the idea from the Old Testament especially was that the Jews were the only people who were really as a nation connected to the true God. They were the only ones that really knew who God was. And there was some truth to that. And that was by design by God. God said, I'm going to establish a covenant with you all, with this group of people. And by the way, it's not because you're really great people. Look in Exodus. He says it's actually the opposite. I'm always perturbed with you guys. It's not because you're great people, but I have chosen to make my name with you so that other nations, when they see us operating with me, God, as your king and you as my people around will say there's something really different about those people, and they'll go ask you and say, what is it about you people? Well, we have this God who's our king. And that would be Old Testament style international evangelism. That's what the entire nation of Israel was for, was to communicate who God was. So much of what he's saying here is really kind of true, except you become blind to the fact that you lose all that information if you start focusing your entire 16 hours a day on how to try harder to do the law. Then the relationship with God is not part of the picture anymore. So he's saying if this is who you are, and you approve what's excellent. Oh, yes, that's fine. Can I walk 10 steps from my house on the Sabbath? Oh, yes, I approve of that. Can I walk 25 steps from my house on the Sabbath? Oh, no, I do not approve of that. Because I know the law. Can I turn on a light switch on the Sabbath? Oh, no, that's work. That's work. Well, what if I just lean against the wall and the switch goes on? Well, no, that would still be work. What if I buy a light switch that I can breathe on and that'll turn on the light? Well, I approve of that because you have to breathe to live. I'm actually quoting you. That's a real part of Talmudic thinking to these days. And we talk a lot about Sabbath stuff. So really there's this subdividing. They see themselves not only as the keepers of the law, but as the people that approve or disapprove of how we walk in the law. And they have spent hours in discussion and debates about what's right and wrong based on a statement from God, and then they work that out to its nth degree. They strain on a gnat and they swallow a camel. And that's exactly what that's all about. So if that's you, because you're instructed in the law, if that's you, and if you're sure that you yourself are a guide to the blind. I laugh at this because when Paul had his Damascus Road experience, he was blinded. Now that wasn't just an accidental part of the story. I think it's God saying to him, you think you know it all and you've got the light. Well, I'm going to blind you for a while. So you can sit for a couple of days and say, gee, maybe I was blind all along. I was blind certainly to who Jesus was, but now that means I'm also blind to what the Old Testament is about, what I've been learning, what I've been patterning my life about. I'm blind about more than I ever understood I was blind about. I'm blind about my blindness. And so Paul right here is actually, it's a little autobiographical right here. You think that you yourself are a guide to the blind. And of course, if I was writing the Bible, I'd write after this, get a clue, you're the blind one. But he doesn't quite put it like that. He says, you consider yourself a light to those that are in darkness. Darkness, by the way, is one way that we all become blind. So a light to those who are in darkness, an instructor to the foolish, a teacher of children, having in the law the embodiment of knowledge and truth. So not only in the first half in the previous slide do you consider yourself righteous because you have some connection with God and some connection with the law, but you consider yourself a guide to all those who don't have your privilege, and you tell them all about it. You just don't see. You're in the dark. You're blind. I'll bring you knowledge and understanding. I'll even teach children, because children can benefit from my great wisdom. So he says, if this is you, and by the way, before you get very dismissive of this is me. And this is you, to a large extent. Many times when we read the Word and we understand the difference between right and wrong, and we're trying to follow the Lord, and we see what's in His Word, we are as easily erred in the direction of acting prideful and instructive to those who are blind when we ourselves are blind as well. Now, this is not to say that there's not truth that we can find in the Word and that we can carry well and tell people, but it's really an attitude of the heart. It's a superior attitude of the heart that comes from the pride of that. There's no place in our life with the Lord that we can take a superior standing over anyone else, which is what he's doing right here. Really. Because, like I read in Titus this morning, at one time we were all foolish. And to a certain degree we remain foolish. And were it not for the grace of God, we would be fools. And we still are fools. It's the wisdom of God that changes our life. It has nothing to do that we've generated out of ourselves. So whenever you're tempted based on your great Bible knowledge to start acting superior and a little above other people, you need to just really stop that. You need to nip it in the bud and say, were it not for the grace of God, I would go there as well. Great verse. If God was going to count sin, which one of us could stand? Anybody? Anybody? It's a variation of when Jesus is with the woman caught in adultery. He who is without sin casts the first stone. Anybody? Anybody? So really, as all mankind, we're fallen. We can come to know truth. We can come to know who the Lord is. That's actually the core of the new covenant. But don't get uppity about it. And he's getting uppity. He's saying you're getting uppity because you think like you have some kind of radical advantage over the rest of mankind because you have the law. You really just need to get off that. So if this is you, he says, if this is you, you then who teach others, do you not teach yourself? Ouch. You tell others about right and wrong, but you don't seem to be teaching yourself about right and wrong. Because while you preach against stealing, do you steal? You who say that one must not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? You who abhor idols, do you rob temples? Pagan temples usually had the best food in town because of the sacrifices. People would steal from them. That's why it was a big issue when Paul starts talking to some of the scattered churches in his letters. He says, what about this whole issue about eating meat sacrificed to idols? Is that right or wrong? So it's a pretty big deal. The barbecue of the age came out of pagan idols' temples. It was pretty darn tasty. So he said to them, so you abhor idols? All right, yeah, it still is. I'm hoping there's some this morning, and there is. Do you rob temples? Come on. You abhor them, and at the same time you try and find barbecue in them. You who boast in the law, you dishonor God by breaking the law. And if you're a Jew reading this, this is twisting the knife. You who boast in the law dishonor the very God that wrote that law by breaking it. Yes, I have the law, and I break it daily. Now, this isn't a matter of cutting them slack by saying, well, nobody's perfect. No, we're talking about someone who, on the one hand, says the law, the right and wrong, doing justice and mercy, these things are valuable, and then you turn around and you don't do them. So the question is, although you've heard them, have they ever worked their way down to becoming a value of your heart, something you love? And he's saying, nope, it hasn't. If you're so busy teaching other people right and wrong, why is it that you're not doing it? He should just call them hypocrites, because that's what this is. For it's written, and this is the stinger, the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. The Gentiles are trying to get a clue who the one God of the universe is through the nation of Israel and through those who are in covenant with him, and yet you're strutting around violating the law all the time, and in your actions you're blaspheming God. Hi, I'm one of the people of God, and then you go and commit adultery with people. What? And then you go steal. What? So people get this idea who your God is based on what you do. See, it's built into the values of your heart and who you know him to be. And that was the whole design of Israel anyway. You see right here, it says the name of God. Remember we talked about the fact whenever you see the name of God, the name in ancient thinking means the reputation, because you just don't name something arbitrarily, right? They named me James, but that's not because I acted like a James. It was just a name of a grandfather. But a name in the ancient idea, like we know in Native Americans and stuff, really should reflect a character trait or an aspect of the person. It's about their reputation. So whenever you see the phrase the name of God or the name of the Lord, what we're talking about is the reputation of him. So what he's saying is that you're walking around violating good and evil. You're doing evil all the time, and you're violating your understanding of the name and reputation of God. So, is God a loving God who's slow to anger and long suffering? Is he that kind of God when you lose your temper with people all the time and condemn them instantly for what they do? Will people believe you when you say you've got a long-suffering God when you're not? And this is what he's talking about. Our actions are an absolute working out of the values of our heart that he changes. And the values of our heart are changed based on who we know God to be, because we've fallen in love with him. We fall in love with him, but it hasn't been incorporated in us. Who you are in terms of your actions and your values and your heart's desire, all these things is what's something that God's transforming. But if you say that you are one of the people of God and you act opposite to who your God is, then that, my friends, is blasphemy, because your heart and your life is testifying against the nature of God. Now, to a Jew who would hear this, they would be picking up stones to stone you right now, because the role of the nation of Israel was to live, to communicate the very attributes of God in life. That's what the law was, in life, to show what goodness is all about. Yeah, I've talked about this many times. In the Old Testament, it comes up over and over again. God says to the nation of Israel, the measure of a nation, I'm going to hold, one of the top things on my list, the measure of a nation, is how they treat the people who are powerless in their culture. That is, widows who have no husbands, that's because their power comes from their husbands. Orphans who have no parents, they're powerless. Strangers who come into your land who have no connection at all. Those are the weakest people, and God says, I am going to judge you based on how you deal with widows, orphans, and strangers. So do this. Now, it's a great plan on God's part, because he says to them, I'm going to rate you based on this, because at one time you yourself were a stranger when you're captive in Egypt. So I expect you to start incorporating in your heart a love for the stranger, a love, because I, as God, have brought you out from that stranger status. So there should be something transformed inside of you. So when people like strangers come into town, people are passing through, and they don't know where to stay the night, you can come up to them and say, hey, I'd love for you to stay in my house. Did you come into my house? I've got a little extra meat here. We can have a little mini feast. I don't know you from Adam, but come on in. I know you're from Syria and you're not an Israelite, but you know what? Our God is such an incredibly hospitable God, and he understands strangers because, you know, at one time our whole nation was a stranger, but God loves us. Why don't you come into the house, have some bread, have some goat, have a good evening. And the strangers then would leave and say, wow, those Israelites, they're really odd. They love strangers. Because their God loves them when they were strangers. What a God they must have. See how this works? So really that's the measure. If you don't live that way, if you live the opposite of that, if you live opposite the attributes of God, what you're doing is you're blaspheming his name to all the people who want to know who God is. It's just the way it is. And now, as though that weren't bad enough for the listening Jew, this is the real twist of the knife. Verse 25. For circumcision indeed is of value if you obey the law, but if you break the law, your circumcision becomes uncircumcision. Now there's a little bit of Jewish talk right here with circumcision, so let's stop for a second and look at that. Circumcision was an act of marking the flesh that was brought about during Abraham's time to mark the people who were children of that covenant promise. And God says to Abraham, you need to do this for the males in your household and even your servants and everyone that comes after you, in the line after you. Everyone like that. That's a mark. It's an external mark to show that you are people of the covenant. It happens right here in Genesis 17. This is God speaking to Abraham. I'll make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make you into nations, not just Israel. Notice that? I'll make you into nations, and kings shall come from you, and I will establish my covenant between me and you and your offspring after you throughout their generations for an everlasting covenant to be God to you and to your offspring after you. And then right after that he says, and this is my covenant which you shall keep between me and you and your offspring forever. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskins, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you. So this is a physical sign of a deeper covenant, a mutual agreement between God and the people of God. If you'll be my people, I will be your God. And this is the mark to show it. Now for the Jews, circumcision was a big deal. I don't have a big enough word to talk about how big it is, because for them, they separated the world between the circumcision and the uncircumcised. You know, in terms of this whole promise right here, this is a sign of that promise. And the men would say, I carry the mark of God's promise to my people. I am one of those promised people. I'm circumcised. A huge deal, huge deal. It can be such a deal that they wouldn't talk about Jews versus Gentiles. They'd just talk about circumcised versus uncircumcised. It was so much a part of their thinking about themselves. You know, I'm a child of that promise, started with Abraham and on. That's so much a part of who I am. Just don't diss circumcision, because that's who we are, and that makes us great and privileged in God's eyes. That's who they are. It's a mark. But it's just a sign of an invisible covenant between God and these people. So he says, you know, circumcision is of value if you obey the law, but if you break the law, your circumcision becomes uncircumcision. I've always likened it to signing a contract. You know, you get a contract, maybe to buy a house, something like that. And at the bottom of the contract, you sign it. You make a sign, and on that sign, it says you agree to everything above it. Well, in a sense, circumcision is that sign that you agree to everything above it. But how crazy it would be if you signed this document and you disagreed and violated everything before it. Well, the signature, the sign would be of value if you agreed to everything above it, but your signature has no value if you disagreed to everything above it. And you've shown in your life you disagree to everything. And that's kind of what he's getting at here. You have the sign written on you, but you don't follow what you signed to. You don't follow the covenant. So what is circumcision if you don't follow the covenant? You see, that's the crazy part about it. If you break the law, your circumcision actually becomes uncircumcision. And that's where the Jews would get up and try and kill you. You cannot reverse my circumcision. I am one of God's people. I'm circumcised. I'm his. That will never change. You can never change that sign. And Paul says, yeah, you can. Start breaking the law. Start completely disrespecting God's law. And I got to tell you, the sign has no meaning. It's as good as if you were uncircumcised. And the blood pressure builds when a Jew hears this. Just builds. He makes it even worse. Paul's good at this because he was a Jew. He knows this. So, okay, listen, he says, if a man who's uncircumcised, and I use these great guys here as our Gentile, uncircumcised, uninformed outsiders. So if a man who's uncircumcised keeps the precepts of the law, will not his uncircumcision be regarded as circumcision? And a Jew would say, no, never. He's not one of us. And Paul's saying, well, if he does the law, he's more of us than you are. These are fighting words. And he who is physically uncircumcised, but keeps the law, he will condemn you, who have the written law and circumcision, but you break the law. Now remember how he called them out at the very beginning? If you happen to be a Jew and you happen to be a approver of things, and you teach children and you teach everyone what's great about the law, and you condemn people basically because they don't follow the law, these guys will condemn you based on the fact that you don't do it. Now that's fighting words. That's where they push the table away, they kick their chairs back, their hands go around each other's throats, and they start fighting and writhing on the floor. Wait. If I hear you right, Paul, me as a Jew is saying, you're telling me that my circumcision counts for nothing? You're telling me that my circumcision, if I happen to, I'm not perfect, I do things wrong, but you're telling me that these guys who aren't circumcised, but who seem to value good and don't value evil and works out in their life, you're telling me that they can actually condemn me, a Jew, a covenant person who's circumcised? And Paul says, well, they seem to have it incorporated into their heart, and you don't. And that might be the bigger issue. In fact, it is the bigger issue, and that's exactly where he goes. These people right here, they might know the law, but if they don't do it, they'll be condemned by the people who do. Ooh. And here's where he clinches it, and this is near the end of the section. Listen, no one is a Jew who's merely one outwardly, which includes circumcision, the sign of circumcision, as well as what you do. No one is a Jew who merely is one outwardly, in that fact, the doer of the law in terms of actions and stuff like that, nor is circumcision outward and physical. Circumcision is physical and it's outward. Well, yeah, the sign is, but maybe it's showing something that's a physical reality of something that's actually a spiritual reality. Even circumcision is not really real circumcision, capital C, the covenant people who love God and follow him. Maybe that real circumcision isn't so much an external marking. Maybe it's something deeper. That's what he's getting at. It's something deeper right here. But a Jew is one inwardly. A Jew that is a follower of the law and a lover of God and his values expressed in the law. A Jew is one inwardly, He's a hearer, and that filters down to his heart. He loves, because of that, he loves the law. He loves good as exhibited by God in his dealings with us and mankind. He's a lover of all that stuff. And he goes on, and his circumcision is a matter of the heart. His circumcision is a matter. Now remember, the heart is where your desires and your hopes and your dreams and your values and the thing that you look toward in life for life. Your heart is the place where that all starts. It drives everything else. It's informed through your head, but then it works its way out naturally through your actions. And he's saying circumcision is not just an external marking, it's something that happens to your heart. If you're a covenant participant with the Creator God in his promises, it's worked its way into circumcising your heart. Now, this isn't just a New Testament concept. I went and looked. I found 4 places in the Old Testament where it talks about being circumcised of the heart. So this was not an unknown thought to the Jews. They understood that circumcision, that is the manifestation of the covenant people of the God who makes covenants and promises with us. That is more than just an external indicator. That actually is an internal change. It's an internal change. And when you look at the word circumcision, it really means, well, the Greek word is paratome. Para, which means around the edges, and tome means to cut. Oh, gosh, I'm crying inside. But it's something that circumscribes and removes flesh. Something that completely encompasses something and flesh is taken away. And this whole idea we'll come back, we'll look at a few verses at the end about the fact that in a sense, in a real sense, if you think more figuratively, if my heart is circumcised, it is surrounded by something that cuts away the dead flesh. And what remains is something that God has created. That's what it's really all about. And we can talk a ton more about that. We don't have time. Look up circumcision and follow it in the Old Testament. You'll see that circumcision of the heart is a much more important issue than just circumcision of the flesh. And he goes on. It's by the Spirit and not by the letter. So, if you're thinking that being doers of the law is trying harder, we got some big problems right now. Because number one, being a Jew is not external, it's inward. And it's something about the circumcision of the heart. And it's something that the Spirit does to our heart. Now, where am I in that whole process? I'm not doing a whole lot, except I'm saying, yes, do it. If my heart's going to be circumcised, if the dead flesh is going to be removed, if the pure heart's going to remain, that's going to be a work of God through His Spirit. It's not going to be a work of me. I mean, that's just the way it is. And we saw this nasty list in chapter 1 of Romans, where more than half of it is dirty heart problems. And I looked at that list and thought, if I couldn't change my heart on those things, really? Heart surgery is hard for us to do. And Jeremiah tells us the heart is desperately wicked. And the deeper you look in here, you look into the desires and aspirations of your heart as a fallen person, as a sheep who's gone astray and gone to his own way, there's some pretty ugly stuff in there. And you can try to clean that out, but I got to tell you, all the things that really perturb me about other people that I want to get out of the gun and shoot them, I better not make eye contact. It's usually on the highway. I've told you this, I have fantasies about installing missiles on my car. And then when someone does something just egregiously wrong against me, deliberately just to make my day horrible, then I can flip up that little red switch and go, psh, and missiles will go out. And I'll drive through their smoke. Well, I got to tell you, I have a problem with my heart. And fortunately, I can't buy missiles. But we all have a problem with our heart. And I can't change that response. It seems to be built into what I am. But praise God, after I've come to the Lord, He's starting to change that. He circumscribes with circumcision around my heat, and He cuts away. Remember peritomai? He cuts away. And somehow what He's leaving behind is a heart that's His, and that's determined to be His, and not about all that stuff. This is a heart surgery that you can't do. It's done by the Spirit and not by the letter. And when he says letter, he's talking about the written law of do's and don'ts. You cannot circumcise your heart by reading the law. That's exactly what he's saying. But what the law can do is tell you how dark your heart is. And that's the problem. The fundamental role of the law, and he'll talk about this at length as he goes on the discussion. The fundamental reason for the law isn't to give you a list of things to try harder at. It's to give you a list of things to expose how dirty you actually are. And to come to the understanding that I could work my entire life and never clean up this mess. Who will clean up this mess? Well, he already tells us early on. The Spirit is the one who comes in and circumcises our heart. Woohoo! Woohoo! And that's very good news. We're talking about bad news? Very good news. He changes not only the actions of my life, he changes the very values and aspirations of my heart. So he works to will and to do his good pleasure in me. To will as well. It's really, really good news. A Jew is one inwardly, and circumcision is a matter of the heart, an inward thing. And it's done by the Spirit, not by the letter. And this works its way out naturally into what we do because we love mercy, we love justice, we love love. Because that's who God is with us. And he's done that to our hearts. And he goes on and says, for this person, his praise is not from man. Ooh, what's he getting at here? Oh, well, often we do in our life. This is the fake do that's not connected to the authentic heart. We do the fake do's, hoping that once we do them, people will say, hey, what a good guy he is. Wow, I could never do that. Right? And to be truthful, I'm guilty of doing good things, hoping that men will see them. if that's even a small component of your motivation for doing good, you just lost it. You lost it. Because then you're doing it for yourself. And he said earlier, it's the whole realm of self-serving in your actions. You can do good, quote unquote, for other people, but you're doing it hoping that others will see it and they'll say, what a great person you are, how much better you are than someone else. And then when you hear those things, you walk around just a little bit taller, a little bit higher than everyone else because you say, hey, I gave $100 at church today. I didn't see you even touch the plate. I'm not making a pitch for giving. But you see what I'm saying? You're hoping other people. Jesus talked about this when he was at the treasury in front of the temple, And here's these big dudes who come by and give all this money and all that kind of stuff. And then this very poor woman comes up and she gives her little mite, her tiniest little piece of money. And he says, paradoxically, that she's given more than all those other guys. And, the financiers around among them say, well, no. And Jesus says, yes. Yes. Those other guys did it hoping that other people would notice. She didn't do it hoping anyone would notice. She did it just between her and God. So these people sometimes do it for the praise of man. But that's not what it's about. Because he says they wait for their praise to come from God. And God, remember, is the one who judges the secrets of our heart. God's the one who looks inside our heart. And he sees that it's been transformed. We don't do things because we want to have man praise us. We do things because we love God and we want him to praise us. We want him to say, oh, well done, thou good and faithful servant. I would love to hear those words. But I don't do these things to earn that. It's not an earning process at all. It's now what I call a reflexive love. We love because he first loved us. It's reflexive. And when we start to understand that love, we start to say, that I love that kind of love. I love the love of God, who even while we were sinners, he died for. That's like love like I've never experienced anywhere here on earth. Who can have that kind of love? And then John just kind of oozes on in all of his letters saying, well, God is love. Why is this happening? Because God is love. What is God? God is love. He's love. And somehow that starts to transform in our hearts where he cuts away the stupid, bad, dark stuff. So I want you to understand what that love is about because that's what life is. That's what life is. We need to quit. Remember, this is the verse that kind of threw us for a loop from last week. It's not the hearers of the law who are righteous before God, but the doers of the law who will be justified. The doers of the law. From what we read today, what are the doers of the law? How do you become a doer of the law? Do you try harder? Well, according to today's passage, that looks like it's, impossible. And in fact, it looks like being a doer of the law is more an issue of being an integrated, I don't know what the word, an integrated person. That is, you hear the law. You love good from that you see in the law. And you love it so much it's incorporated into your values. It's something the Spirit does in your heart. And then it starts to ooze out of your pores and it starts to becoming part of what you naturally do. Even when no one's looking, it's part of your life. Wow. Trying harder doesn't seem to be it. There seems to be a heart issue that's a much bigger issue. Now, don't make a mistake. He already told us that God will judge us based on our actions. But the difference is the remedy isn't to try harder. The remedy is to let him transform our heart. And that's what he's telling us. The actions are an undeniable coupling to the status of your heart. And so, if you want to have an understanding about the invisible truth about the nature of your heart, look at your actions when no one's looking. I'll just tell you. So he's saying here, it doesn't matter what you hear in the law, doesn't matter what you teach out of the law, doesn't matter how much you think you know God. The issue is, has your heart been transformed? Have your actions followed? If that is true, then there's real change that's gone on inside. And praise God, the good news of the New Testament is that he comes to live within us, and as he lives within us, he cuts away junk, flesh. He cuts away flesh, and he starts to recreate a heart, and then slowly your actions start to match this regeneration. It's astonishing. Paul later on will say, don't you know that you're the temple of God? That is, he actually lives inside of you. He's in you. Christ in you, the hope of glory. And Paul will use this preposition all the time about God and your relationship. He's in you. He is as in you as in the Old Testament he was in the temple. He's there. He's present in you. He's the one that's working inside your heart. He's the one that's changing the desires and the aspirations of the heart. He's the one that's grooming you to love him and for you to love him. He's doing all this work hidden inside your heart. And it'll start working its way out in your actions. Now, I became a believer 40 plus years ago. And as I look back on those 40 years, I think about, can I see these changes happening? Do I see evidence in my actions in the outward part of my life that would indicate that these things are changing? I can, in a lot of areas. A lot of areas. Some of those areas that I despaired ever being able to change, and issues of the heart. Issues of the heart. And he has. Now, if you're sitting there saying, I can't, well, be patient, because sometimes it takes a while. God is wonderfully patient with us, because I think that if he brought that much change I've experienced in 40 years in an overnight session, I would be dead, because it's so much change. It's so much truth to face how dark your heart really is. That if he unleashed that overnight, we'd all be just broken and nothing. And when we come to him, we get a piece of it. We understand a piece of it. That's part of our coming to him. But I never knew the extent of the darkness of my heart. But over 40 years, he's brought them out one at a time. Hey, Jim, did you know you're like this? No, you're right. Has that always been there? Yeah. What do you say we cut that away today? Okay. So I'm cutting it away. I'm going to remake you from the inside out. Confession is to agree with God's statement about the nature of our heart. Con means together with. I agree. So I say to God, I agree. Man, that's just ugly. Will you do heart surgery on me and change this? I can fake people out by changing my outside actions, hoping that they'll never kind of figure out the fact that this part of my heart is really dark. I can fake that for a long time, but I'm tired of faking it. I want to be remade from the inside out. Will you remake me from the inside out? He does. The difference in my faith from 20? What's the difference in my relationship with God when I was 20 and now? I'm much more at rest. A lot of things disturbed me back when I was 20. A lot of things I thought I had to actually accomplish for God. I thought I had to be responsive to God to do. And he's just saying, no, agree with me about the nature of your heart. I'll cut that away. Agree with me on this. Yeah. Stop covering up by lying about it. Well, I don't really do that. He who judges the secrets of our heart, he sees it. He sees it. But we do have to agree with him. And then when we agree with him, that's confession. When we agree with what he says about us, we give ourselves up to him and we say, will you change it? And he rubs his hands together and says, I've just been waiting for the chance. Let's do this. Cuts away the flesh. A Jew is one inwardly. And there's the problem with the try-harder syndrome. A Jew is one inwardly. And circumcision is a matter of the heart. By the Spirit, not by the letter. His praise is not from man, but from God. It's not about trying harder. It's about heart surgery. And that's what God does. He still will judge our actions because our actions are an outward, natural manifestation of the nature of our heart. He still will, because that's his way of saying that. So here in this kind of a heart surgery, he looks at us and changes us from the inside out so that our actions start to match the change inside. But coming to love him more, coming to love his love, even at the end of the Old Testament, the law seems to be reduced with one of the prophets where he says, what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God? 3 things. It's actually to do justice, to help those who are undertrodden, and to love. It's to love chesed. You need to love and to walk humbly with God. That's a pretty small list. But it's nearly an impossible list to do on a categorical list. That's something that God draws us to him to do. Heart surgery is what he does. And just a few verses and we'll quit with this. Colossians 2:8. Paul talks about it here. See to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit. By the way, try harder is one of those. according to human tradition, according to elemental spirits of the world, and not according to Christ. For in him the whole fullness of deity dwells bodily, and you have been filled in him, who is the head of all rule and authority. In him also you were circumcised, yea, with a circumcision made without hands, by putting off the body of the flesh by the circumcision of Christ. Check this out. 1 Peter 4:2. So as to live the rest of the time in the flesh, no longer for the lusts of men, but for the will of God. Which now, if you understand the physical nature of circumcision, you understand why God used that as a sign. I will say no more, because this is... So as to live the rest of the time in the flesh, no longer for the lusts of men, but for the will of God. And that's what he transforms in our heart. He transforms us from being terminally self-centered to being wonderfully and joyously centered on his will. And that is life. Turn it on yourself, pursue pleasures for the rest of your life, have it be all about self. And the bad news is, unfortunately, is that when you make the decision, all you have is yourself. And the heart's desperately wicked. It's a horrible situation to be in. It's a horrible situation. We're going to sing a song. Let me just pray. Father, what it is that you do. You come and you live within us. This body that in a sense is like the temple. You come and live within us. And you radically clean house. You circumcise our hearts without hands. In a way we don't fully understand. But Father, that cutting away of the flesh, that cutting away of our addiction to the lusts of our heart, and replacing it with an adoration and a love for you, that is astonishing and mysterious to us. We don't get the half of it. And yet, Lord, we see you doing that. We see you coming in and dwelling within us. We see that you come to make your home inside us. And then in that process, there's not enough place in there for two wills, ours and yours in that sense. You cut away the selfish us, and you replace it with the loving us for you. Lord, I pray that as we live amongst a people who are dedicated to the prospect of changing our lives by trying harder, and then trying harder still. Lord, I pray that somehow you would enable us through your Spirit to communicate this great rest that comes from trusting in you to radically transform and do heart surgery on our hearts, the things we love, the things we desire, the things we look for life. And to communicate that we have a God who's powerful enough to not only just change the actions of our hands, but to change the aspirations of our heart and make them holy toward him. And Lord, I have to admit, I'm at a loss with some people sometimes to say that well. And yet that is exactly what I have experienced from the day I knew you. How do you do this? And yet you have. And you do. And you continue to do so. So Lord, for all of us in this room this morning and anyone who might be listening on the internet, which we know there's a lot of, I just pray that you would continue to remind us that this regeneration of life, this cutting away of the flesh and its lusts and all that dead-end kind of self-interest, that you are active in our lives once we give our hearts to you and say, God, I want you and you alone. And you come in and radically transform us. And from the moment of that decision, we're your children, instantly. And you're the Father who cleans us up from that orphan, living on the streets, dirty face existence in this place that we call earth that's fallen because of sin. And you're the one that remakes us. So, Father, thank you for the fact that we can rest in you. We no longer have to put on our list the things that we have to do today to be acceptable to the religious community. And yet the irony is that the more that we let you change us from the inside out, the more our actions are transformed to communicate your heart. That's just astonishing. Lord, thank you for your great loving kindness to us. We love you because you loved us. We want to fall more in love with you. And Father, we want others to know who you are as you transform our hearts, which in turn transforms our actions, and which in turn speaks of the unbelievable love of God in our lives. So thank you for all this now. Your word is astonishing. Transform us with it, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.